Welcome to the Bothell City Council meeting of October 2nd, 2018. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All council members are here. Meeting agenda approval. Is there any changes to tonight's meeting agenda? Seeing none. Review of the projected agenda. Looking good. Review of public engagement opportunities. There we go. Testing my eyesight. Beardsley Boulevard, 185th Street, Northeast Crosswalk ribbon cutting on this Thursday, October 10 to 11 at the corner of Beardsley Boulevard and 185th. Bothell Underground Beer Festival is this Saturday from 12 to 6 p.m. in the City Hall garage. Bus Rapid Transit workshops. Sound Transit will host 2 public meetings on Monday, October 8th at the UW Bothell North Creek Event Center. The first meeting is from 1 to 3 p.m., followed by a second meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. Receive updates and help shape Bus Rapid Transit on State Route 522 and Northeast 145th Street. Visit their website for other locations and more information. Next is the Smart Plant Choice for Northwest Gardens, Tuesday, October 9th from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Bothell Operations Center. It's up by, people don't know where that is. It's up by Red Robin in Candy Park. And then the Fire Prevention Week open house, Saturday, October 13th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Bothell Fire Stations. Is that all of them, Chief? Yes. They'll all be open? Okay. Okay, let's see. Staff briefing, Vision 2050. We have Michael Catterman, our Community Development Director. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Let's see if I can. Do I need to do something here? 6 months, I haven't yet been cleared on how to do a PowerPoint, so.
Is that it right there?
That top one. There we go.
I have to go back and flip a switch, so.
Okay, thank you. So I have about 5 years worth of process and a few hundred pages to summarize in 5 minutes, so buckle up, we're going to go fast through this. So tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about the Vision 2050 plan. This is an update of Vision 2040. That's the regional growth plan for the 4-county area, including King, Kitsap, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. This affects how we do our planning locally, so that's why I wanted to give you a quick update about this tonight. You had a study session back in January that talked about the Growth Management Act, Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan, and the other factors that go into that. So tonight I want to highlight this and the work that's upcoming over the next few years leading up to our next update in the comprehensive plan. So why are we doing this now? The plan was adopted back in 2014, I think was the last update of Vision 2040. We are adding 1.8 million people to the 4-county region between now and 2050, and another 1.2 million jobs to that area. So that's a significant increase in our population and employment numbers for the 4 counties. Some of that growth is going to come to Bothell, obviously. So we want to look at how the regional plan is structured and how that affects Bothell's planning for the future. The overall goal is still basically the same. It's not a wholesale rewrite of 2040, it's really an update, but there's some significant changes to that I want to make you aware of. One of is that one of the alternatives they're considering would make it more transit focused. It would still focus growth in cities, and it would still focus the growth within those cities in specific centers that are identified. And as you know, we have a regional growth center in Bothell, that's the Canyon Park area. One of the things that came out of the framework update that we worked on a couple of years ago through PSRC was to designate countywide centers. So Snohomish County and King County will be doing that. That'll be part of our process as well. That will also factor into where the growth will go. They're looking at adopting 2050 at the General Assembly meeting in May of 2020. So that's about a year and a half off. And there's a lot of work that's going to come during that period. These are just some of the areas that they've prioritized in terms of the update. Most of these are in 2040. A couple of areas of emphasis that are new to the 2050 update are the social equity and housing affordability. So all of these will be a focus of that update. What I want to do now is just give you a real quick reminder of what all the pieces are that go into our planning and how those affect what we do here in Bothell. So we start with the Growth Management Act. That's the foundation that tells us what we need to plan for, where we need to do that, and when it's due. It does not tell us so much how. We decide that at the local and regional levels, and each of those levels affect what we do. The next one up is Vision 2050. So that really looks at the distribution of growth through the four-county area. And again, 2040 looks at that focused mostly in centers, the regional centers. The next version may look at it a little bit differently, and that would affect where our growth goes as well. When we get to the countywide planning policies of the CPPs, we work with two counties. They have each has their own set of policies and growth targets that they use. They get a growth forecast from the state. That's then allocated to the cities. That's negotiated with each of the cities as to how much growth we will accept from those two counties in each of those areas. So we have to treat them like we're almost two separate cities in different counties. And we have to be able to show that we have the capacity to take those. And that factors then into our comprehensive plan, the Imagine Bothell Comp Plan. That's where we get specific about where those growth targets will go. And remember, those targets are both population and employment. Consistency is one of the basic tenets of GMA. So if you think about this pyramid with GMA as the foundation, everything above that has to be consistent with everything that's below it. So the Vision 2050 has to be consistent with GMA. Our comprehensive plan has to be consistent with the countywide policies of both Snohomish and King County, Vision 2050, and the GMA. So we've got a little bit more requirement of us by the time we get up to the top of the pyramid. So what are the implications for Bothell? These are the things that are going to affect our planning when we get to our update in 2023. The first thing is the roadmap to Washington's future. This is a study that was funded by the legislature last session or the session before. It's being conducted by the Ruckelshaus Center. I know the deputy mayor attended a workshop on that, as did I. And I think our planning commission chair also attended one of those. It's really looking at the local experience of growth management. So it includes the Growth Management Act, as well as the related statutes and case law that has implications for how we do planning. And it's going to come out with some recommendations of what might need to change in state law as a result of that. So that will affect what we do in 2023, depending on what the legislature does with that. Vision 2050 I've talked about. They're retaining the regional growth centers. They're going to look at alternative distributions. Again, that could affect how much growth comes to this area, but there will be growth throughout the region. We're all going to have to be looking at accepting additional growth during that next period between now and 2050. The specific growth targets that we develop with the counties come out of those OFM forecasts. We have the forecasts from 2017. Those go through 2040. We won't get the forecast for 2050 until 2022. This is where it gets really complicated. And in planning circles, we call this the Mayan calendar, because nothing lines up quite the way it should in order for us to have all the information we need to do our update. So we will most likely work with the 2017 forecast from OFM, and each of the counties will then work with us to allocate those to the individual cities. I expect that will happen in next year or the year after. We wouldn't want to go any later than that, or it starts to bog down what we need to do in our preparations. But that's where we get our specific growth targets. The countywide planning policies will then need to be updated to reflect those targets, as well as reflect the changes that come out of the Vision 2050 plan. Again, we have to be consistent with all of that. That's why this needs to happen before we do ours. The other piece of this is the buildable lands report. This is another state requirement. We're one of the cities in 7 counties that have to do this about every 7 years. Our next report is due in 2022. This is a reporting on how we have done with allocating our growth, or accommodating our growth, I should say. How efficient has our land use been in terms of what we've projected, what we've expected in terms of density and commercial development? Where has that gone? Is it making a most efficient use of those lands? What do we have left to accommodate future growth? And then finally, we get to our plan in 2023 when that's next due for an update. So all of these other things have to happen ahead of that. So in essence, we're already in the process of working toward that update. So that's, just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of some of the things that we're addressing on the local and regional level that are going to affect us as we go forward over the next. 2023 sounds like a long ways off, but it will be here very soon. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple questions for you. What's the 4 counties? The 4-county area includes which counties?
King, Kitsap, Pierce, and Snohomish.
Okay. And then for 2040, the 2040 planning that we did, let's say a decade ago, I can't remember what year you said we did it.
We last updated our Imagine Bothell plan in 2015, and that went through 2035. So we have to do a 20-year plan. So our next update is due in 2023. That'll have to go through at least 2043, and we may go a little bit beyond that, depending on what numbers we have available.
Because I was trying to, so you said we're supposed to plan for 2050 for the 4-county area, 1.8 million people. And so I was trying to compare that to that decade ago. What were we supposed to prepare for growth?
Oh.
For the 2040 vision?
I want to say it was a little over 1 million.
So it's almost twice as many people we're expecting in the next decade compared to the last decade.
Well, some of that is included in that, because remember, that was through 2040. Now we're extending that out another 10 years.
Oh, okay.
So there is additional growth, so maybe an additional, 0.8 or something like that.
Between 2040 and 2050, just another 0.8 million people.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's an incremental increase over 2040. So it's between now and 2050. Before it was between 2014 and 2040. So it's a moving target.
Right. That's not confusing at all.
No, not at all.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there other questions? Councilmember McNeil?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. So when we set our growth, when we go through that process of setting growth targets, do we look at transportation also during that process?
We don't look specifically at transportation, but we look at how well we can accommodate future growth, and that includes infrastructure, and transportation is a part of that. We look at other things. Primarily, we look at what's our land use capacity, and where do we fit in the bigger picture of the regional growth strategy. So currently, the designations they have in Vision 2040, they have metropolitan cities, and there are 5 of those in the 4-county area. Then they have core cities. Bothell is a core city because we have a regional growth center. Those 2 categories, if you will, are expected to take the bulk of the growth, because that's what 2040's vision was, is that it would be concentrated more in those types of cities. That could shift slightly in 2050, and part of what that shift may be is really focusing growth where there is what they're referring to as high capacity transit, which includes light rail, commuter rail, ferry, and bus rapid transit. And since we have 3 bus rapid transit lines that are planned, and in the planning stages right now for Bothell, then that could mean that we would be looking at a little bit higher percentage of growth at the regional level. And again, they don't assign to specific cities at PSRC through the vision process. They say these are the general categories and areas where we want to see that growth happen, but we get the specific numbers through the county process.
Gotcha. And then from the 2040 plan to the 2050 plan, do we know where our growth was during that period, the 2040 plan? And is there a way for us to tell what it would be if we were to incrementally go up to 2050? Like, so did we add 10,000 during that time frame, 20,000 during that time frame? Is there a way to statistically say, okay, between 2040 and 2050, we're incrementally going to go up another 5,000? Is there a way to, I know there's annexations and things like that, but is there a way for us to tell what that growth is going to look like for us specifically?
To a certain extent, yes, we can. We can't get too specific on it because we're dealing with different time frames. So our plan right now goes through 2035. So I couldn't tell you what our growth is for 2040. I could do just an extrapolation and say this is probably what it would be forecast as, or actually what not the forecast, but the target would be for 2040. But once we get those numbers, then we can do a little bit more of a comparison as to how much that is an increase over where we were going, say what the trend line might be different.
Okay, fabulous, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Nope. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Next is council committee city manager reports. Council members, any reports? Councilmember McNeil?
Thank you. I've got an update. Regional Law Safety Justice Committee We met last Friday. We had the opportunity to meet 3 of the newest chiefs in the area. Chief Rafael Padilla, hopefully I'm not butchering that, from Kent. We did not get to meet the Seattle Police Chief, Carmen Best, but we did meet the new Deputy Chief, McGarth Green. And then we met the new sheriff, and I'm probably going to butcher this one, Joe Hank Nick, if I'm saying that correctly, hopefully Chief. Anyway, a very interesting conversation around different parts of our region, around law enforcement. Some of the interesting takeaways were folks in the north end have different issues than folks in the south end. Up here, we're mainly focusing on property crimes and the opioid problems and the epidemics like that. Down south, there's a big emphasis on gangs, which is it's a mind-blowing experience to sit in a room with a bunch of law enforcement people talking about what's happening right next door to us. And when I say right next door, I mean our neighbors to the south of us in Kent and Burien and the things that they're going through. So very robust discussion about these issues and how we can help law enforcement and get more engaged. Looking at more proactive policing, how do we fund the police departments to ensure that they're able to do the proactive policing. I was very proud to be able to say the city of Bothell has a bond and levy out right now for public safety. There's a lot of support throughout the region for law enforcement and fire, et cetera. So very happy to have that conversation. It was a good conversation around law enforcement. Upcoming meetings, we're going to talk more about the Navigator program, which hopefully the chief can come to that meeting. There's a huge amount of support. The city of Kirkland actually has a bond measure out right now on their own to fund their own Navigator program. So I was super excited to hear that, and maybe we can see how that works. There's an upcoming meeting around deferral, the deferral program, deferring people from jail. And then we're going to hear more from community groups on things that they can do, like Tukwila has a program in the Tukwila Mall dealing with youth and helping youth stay out of jail and things like that. So super exciting meeting around regional law and justice, and I'm proud that we've got our bond out, and hopefully we can start doing some things in our own city here. So that is my report. Thank you.
Councilmember McAuliffe.
I find it quite compelling that we have, kind of to the south, we have gangs as well, but also to the north when we talk about Everett and up in that area too. So we're kind of surrounded. And so I think things that we need to do, such as the Navigator program and other programs like that, so that we can insulate ourselves somewhat from that, because otherwise we're going to be closed in. And I guess my other concern is the deferral program. I'm hoping if they do release people early, they'll give them the support they need to have employment, to get into jobs, they've been in jail a while, and so now how do they get back into society? So I'm hoping when you talk about the deferral, you'll think about that too.
Yeah, and deferral's not necessarily just deferring, sorry, am I okay? Deferral is not just necessarily deferring somebody from going to jail. It's also, there's a lot of programs around inmates coming out of jail and bringing them back into society the right way. So very, very robust discussion around that. So.
All right, any other council reports, committee reports? Seeing none, we'll move on to the visitor comment. Each person addressing the council will give his or her name in an audible tone of voice for the record, and unless the council grants further time, shall limit the address to 3 minutes. No person other than the council and the person having the floor will be permitted to enter into any discussion either directly or through a member of the council without the permission of the mayor. And I have one sign-up sheet, and it is Al Fagenbaum. The curmudgeon, come on up.
I wrote down budget because I wasn't sure you people were going to be discussing it, and we had a little discussion about it Sunday at the city library with Davina. There was some concern about the problems with budgeting, and I know that's a problem for virtually every city. You never have enough money, and my concern is that, and I sympathize with you in that regard, but my concern is that you be more careful, or as careful as can be, with how you designate money to be spent. Now, I know Davina said that, because I asked the question, that the priorities for budgeting is public safety is first and foremost. Fine, that's, in my opinion, that's the way what it should be. But there is a couple of areas in which you're spending money, which I take issue with, and one of them, as you know, my feelings about affordable housing. I think this is a bunch of nonsense. People live in the houses they can afford, and there are some people who can't afford a house. That's not my fault. I didn't cause those people to be unable to afford to live in Bothell. I'm sorry, and neither did anybody else here be responsible for that. You won't subsidize my housing. Why would you subsidize somebody else's? It's a loser. So if you're giving money to the county affordable housing fund and you have a problem with the budget, that's the first place I'd look to cut. I'm not sympathetic to spending money that the city doesn't have a responsibility to spend. It's not the fundamental responsibility of any government to provide me or anybody else with housing. It seems to me the Declaration of Independence said we have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Housing is part of the pursuit of happiness. We have a right to pursue it. That doesn't mean we're guaranteed it. And you people should not be spending money you cannot afford to spend on things like that. Even though it's maybe not a lot of money, still, if you saw that amount of money lying on a sidewalk, you'd bend down and pick it up. That I know. So this is a problem that I just will hope you look more closely at how you decide how you're going to budget the city's funds. The other issue I have was with this gentleman's presentation of this Vision 2050. I mean, to me, I would like to ask him if he can tell me what stocks are going to go up tomorrow and which ones are going to go down. So why is he talking? He can't. So why is he talking about 2050? If you're spending money on 2050, stop it. That's nonsense. In 1945, nobody was able to predict that in 1963 there would be a billboard at the south end of Seattle that said, "The last person to leave Seattle, please turn out the lights." Nobody could have predicted that, and that's what he's trying to do and what you're trying to do if you agree with him. This is a waste of money. You cross bridges when you get close to them. I can see planning for the next few years, but 2050, no. That's way too far out. So please, think twice about how you spend the city's money. I know because I know it's a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the only sign-up sheet I have. Does anybody else want to provide public comment? No. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. Nothing's been pulled. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by the Deputy Mayor, second by Councilmember Agnew. Any discussion? Seeing none, go ahead, place your vote. We good? Passes unanimously. On to new business.
Mr. Mayor, would the council entertain the opportunity to switch the two items? Our consultant isn't here yet for the lobbyist item, and I would be prepared to present on the broker if that would be all right.
I think that's fine, isn't it? Yeah. So, okay, so we'll do the second new business, AB 18-145. Do we have to switch the numbers? Are we okay?
I think we're fine.
We're fine. Okay. Professional services agreement for broker services. City Manager, you have the floor.
I do. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The City Council had directed staff during several study session discussions about marketing some of the downtown properties. As you know, I made a presentation several months ago with regards to the remaining 4 properties that the city owns in the downtown. One of those parcels has received a consent decree, 2 agreed orders, and we're working on the 3rd agreed order, which is parcel D, which is on the corner of 522 and 527. That is nearing the opportunity for us to remarket that parcel for sale. And so based on council's informal direction, I went ahead and issued an RFQ, a request for qualifications to the broker industry, requesting proposals to come back as to the types of services and the commissions related to those services to support the city in marketing and selling initially Block D or Lot D. Those proposals were due in August, and a team of staff reviewed the proposals that we received. We received 3. From our review, we interviewed 2 of the top firms, and from that, we made a selection based on the interview that we had, the proposal that was submitted, the rates, and the just general conversation and what we felt were qualifications to assist the city in marketing our property. As you can see in the agenda bill, the rates are provided in a written form in a table there. The commission rate is on a sort of a graduated basis, and the reason for that is when a parcel is owned by the city, a city can put, as we have with the downtown sub-area, certain restrictions or expectations on the parcel, and that can affect the value of the parcel. So for a broker to go out and to initiate the sale of a parcel, sort of that baseline work is the same regardless of the price of the parcel. And so the idea behind the graduated scale is that sort of that initial work and the ultimate sale is really the initial fee, and the price of the property, then the fee goes down based on the price of the property. And we felt that was a fee that we negotiated. We think that's a reasonable fee, and it's certainly well within sort of the commercial real estate market. And so our recommendation is for the council to approve a contract with Kidder Matthews. We also have a representative here, Blair Howe is here. If you had any questions about the services for Kidder Matthews, how they would provide them, we're both happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Okay, is there any questions? Deputy Mayor?
So, as I understand it, when we first decided to do this process, you had given us some options. There's the RFP option, which would have more public participation, but that would take a longer amount of time. And at that time, we anticipated that the site would be cleaned up now-ish, and from our recent discussion, you had mentioned it's probably more like 12 to 18 months from now. And I don't want to throw a wrench in the works, but I'm wondering, given that, is it worth council having a conversation, at least amongst us, what type of a development we're interested in? And the reason I ask is because it seems as though we might have time, if it's not currently zoned, to get us what we're looking for. We would have time to perhaps change that if that's allowable. And so I just wanted to throw out there, since we have the time, and I don't know exactly what this process looks like with Kidder Matthews, I just wanted to ask if it was worth, if council was interested in having that discussion, and maybe just exploring what our options are, given that we now seem to have a little more time.
Do you want me to respond, or do you want?
Go ahead. Yeah, I had something, but go ahead.
Yes. That certainly, and we do have a little bit more time. I think it would be something that we should do in January or February, and because we have a representative to come in and really help us understand what's the best and highest use and what gets us the best value of the property, that's one of the benefits of having a broker, is they can assist us with those things. I spoke with our community development director as well, Mike Cotterman, and we would need some assistance. It's a little bit out of our technical expertise, but it wouldn't be an expensive contract to bring somebody in to sort of facilitate that conversation, to really talk about what could happen on that parcel, and give the council the opportunity to do that. So it's very doable. My suggestion would be we do it very early in 2019.
Thanks. Yeah, it seems like we had the time, and this is kind of, I keep calling it the crown jewel of our properties that we own, and given our budget issues and whatnot, it just seemed like we have the luxury of maybe being a little more proactive about what we'd like to see there and how we make that happen. So thank you.
Councilmember McAuliffe?
Thank you. And I know that we have time with D, and that Kidder Matthews will proceed toward that. But I also want to talk about A, which is now like ready to go. So is Kidder Matthews also going to put that up for sale?
So I don't have direction yet from council to sell A. The last direction I had was to hold and look at other options for parcel A, which is the old Bothell Bike and Ski off of 527 or 522. So it was something that I was going to bring up during the budget study sessions on the 9th and the 16th. as additional options for revenue for the city to balance our budget. But if the council directed me to sell the parcel, then yes, it would be Kidder Matthews who would do that for us.
And I would just entertain that the council consider putting A up for sale because it's ready to go. So however you process that, Mr. Mayor, that would be my goal.
So we got kind of two questions on the floor from the council members. So one being, we probably need to schedule that to say, yes, we want to move forward with selling Lot A. I don't think we can just do that as part of this agenda item. Just, but does the council feel like they'd like to hear that and consider selling Lot A? We can't really take a vote on
No,
it because that's not helpful.
It
But how
will
about-
be in your presentation on the 9th and the 16th, so you'll have the opportunity to discuss it. It's
Oh, okay. So it'll be a scheduled
already
thing.
in the,
Okay.
yeah, it's already in the presentation.
Then that's the budget presentation.
Correct.
Okay. Councilmember McAuliffe, does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then back to the deputy mayor. So I was here when we sold Lot D the first time, and I would love to have a conversation with people that understand what the potential is of that property, and as a council kind of have an opportunity to weigh in before we just have one thing show up and this is it kind of a situation. So I'm supportive of that. I think it'd be a good exercise for us to really understand our zoning code as well, so that you can see like this is how big the thing could potentially be and this is how small it could potentially be. So I would support that. I don't know if you need a consultant to do that. I think we could, it's up to you. I don't know if you have the expertise in-house, but anything could be better than the last time we sold Lot D. That's all I have to say about that. So does anybody else have an opinion? People feel good about having Lot D or having the consultant come back and, is it a broker? What do we call these guys?
The broker sells it. If
Right.
they would assist us in this process, that they would be part of the conversation. That's one of the things they can do for us, is tell us what's valuable, what the market's looking for, are there opportunities to change that part of the downtown sub-area plan for that parcel in particular. So I guess I'm looking for specific. I'm not really hearing a very specific direction at this point, whether that's an item you want us to bring back as part of this.
Okay.
Am I getting a majority to say yes? That's what I'm asking for. Is a majority specifically saying yes, you want to open up the downtown sub-area plan specifically for Lot D?
How do we handle this? All right, Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. So I would generally be supportive of it, but I would like to understand a little bit more about what that process looks like. Like, are we going to pay for that process? Is it going to be free? How long is it going to take? I mean, I'd just like some more information on it, but I'm supportive to find out what we can do, to empower that property, basically. But there's some other stuff that I would like to know before I say, yes, I'm 100% behind it.
Okay.
Councilmember Zorns?
I would like some discussion on, upzoning Lot D down, what are you saying, the first of the year, possibly? And not so much from the standpoint of padding the sale of the property for ourselves, but looking long-term, are there some things that we can gently modify on that piece of property that are going to benefit Bothell in the long run? Like, are there places that we could, say, tuck in some affordable housing? How would the community react to, another story on that piece of property? Or can we encourage more retail in that area? But I would love to have that discussion, because those are both things that Bothell really needs. And if that lot can accommodate it, and whoever purchases it wants to take advantage of any zoning changes that we put on that, I think that would be a good discussion for us to have and open up those options on that lot. So I'm in support of talking about that at some point.
Councilmember Olson?
I, too, am supportive of just learning more about it, exploring our options, seeing what can be on that lot, since it is such a visible location in our downtown. So I think if we just take that moment to really think about it, see what the community says, make a good decision.
Okay. Are you getting the direction? A little more? Councilmember McAuliffe?
Comment, please. So I appreciate having the time to do some of this discussion, but on a timeline for selling D and selling A, I'd like to have us have a timeline so we can move forward, because financially, we need to do this. We need to sell property. We cannot sit on this property any longer. So if I have a timeline that tells me, here's what the council will know and do, and what's the best use of this property, and that decision should be made by this point, then I'm going to be good with it.
So the challenge with the timeline is the contamination.
I know, but I mean, I'm sorry, at least the council should have in their mind, this is when we should be making our decisions.
Councilmember Agnew?
I think it's probably one of the most important lots that we have in the city that we're going to sell. I think we need to get all the information we can possibly get on this and make the correct decision.
So my suggestion would be then to bring back a sort of a, not a particularly deep agenda bill, but one that outlines a potential process or a couple of processes for the council to consider of what this might look like, what it could entail, some cost behind it, a timeline of what that would be. The question would be, should we also include EF and G and P South? I think that's another thing we could add into the staff report, just to see if you want to consider those things as well. So we can do that and bring that back probably in November. And again, A is not contaminated and is ready for sale. So that will be part of your discussion and direction as part of the budget hearings or the budget study sessions on the 9th and the 16th.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Bring
Okay.
back a agenda bill with a couple options
Okay.
for us to choose from.
Yep.
For the properties the city owns only.
Yeah, right, correct.
Okay, not the whole downtown,
Right.
reopening the downtown sub-area plan.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
happy to do that.
Back to the agenda item. So is there any questions about tonight's agenda item? Is there a motion to approve?
I move the recommended action.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Agnew, second by Councilmember McNeil, to authorize the city manager to execute in substantially the same form as presented the professional service agreement with Kidder Matthews for a commission rate ranging from 0.75% to 3% based on the property's sale price. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, go ahead, place your vote. Passes unanimously, and we are backing up here to AB 18, oh, sorry, thank you, congratulations. Now we're moving on to AB, well, you don't know what you signed up for, did you? AB 18-144, 2019-2021 Legislative Agenda and Policy Manual, and we have Tori Brazitas to kick it off.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and members of the City Council. I'm just going to be a quick introduction, and then I'll hand it over to our lobbyists. But just wanted to remind you that we are joined here by Brianna Murray, Vice President at Gordon Thomas Honeywell, and Shelley Helder, Government Affairs Consultant. They're going to be continuing the conversation today about developing your legislative platform. So I will hand it to them. Just one note I did want to make is that one of the items that they'll be presenting to you from this development would be some options around some challenging state policy issues around Shelton View Forest. I just wanted to acknowledge, I chatted with the city manager, and this is not an item that I believe we've received direction from the full council on. She was going to be bringing this back to discuss the grant and getting an extension to the grant money that we have from Snohomish County. At that point, it was going to be then to get full direction from the council on that particular item. What we've done here is suggest some fixes for the state policy issues related to it. So just wanted to clarify, that's a little bit unusual in the order, but you'll be seeing more, there'll be more discussion on it. So that's all I have. Any questions for me before we start? Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Brianna Murray, and I have with me Shelley Helder. We're here to give you an update on the development of your legislative agenda. So in the last month, we have dove in deep, began learning a lot about your issues, and had many conversations with city staff. Just as a reminder on the task before us, is we're assisting you all in developing a legislative program, and our recommendation is to develop 2 documents associated with that. The first is a legislative agenda that identifies your top 2 to 3 priorities, and really has a focus on return on investment by looking at identifying funding requests, and our recommendation is to identify 1 funding request per budget. So 1 within operating, 1 within capital, and 1 within transportation. For the many other hundreds of issues that the legislature considers that have an impact on city business, we're recommending that those go into a policy manual that would accompany the legislative agenda and would be multiple pages. So to reiterate, the end of this process, our hope is that you all will approve a legislative agenda that's 1 page with your top 2 to 3 priorities and a multi-page policy document that expresses your policy wishes on all the other issues that the legislature considers. So with that as our end goal, I'm going to turn it over to Shelley to explain the process that we're utilizing in getting you there.
So as when we were before you last, we kind of opened up the floor to see if any of you had ideas or suggestions on some of the top priorities for consideration. We've also had that discussion with department directors, and as a result of the information that we've been receiving, we've followed up with directors and had individual meetings with staff members to dig a little bit deeper on potential projects. Now we're before you and we're wanting to share kind of what we've been hearing and are hoping for feedback. And then we're going to continue to refine those requests and develop a draft legislative agenda and policy manual for you to look at and review. And then ultimately, as Brianna mentioned, the goal would be for you to adopt both of those documents. Right now, we are still very much in the preliminary phases, but we wanted to check in with you and let you know what we've been hearing, and provide opportunity for you to let us know, yes, we're on the right track, or we've missed something, or no, this isn't correct. So I'll start with transportation. We heard loud and clear that transportation is a top priority for the citizens and for the council. And so at the initiative of Deputy Mayor Dewar, she suggested that we meet with Senator Palumbo and Representative Kloba, and so we coordinated that meeting last week. Prior to that, Brianna and I met with WashDOT, and we did research to kind of get up to speed on the history of WashDOT projects in this region and kind of what the WashDOT vision is. Based on those conversations, we have a recommendation for the city to consider. We understand that the objective is that the improvements along 522 and really on the north end of 405 be completed in time for bus rapid transit in 2024. To get there, we see there being 2 primary steps. The first would be securing $20 million for right-of-way, which is an agency, so WashDOT has requested that that be included in the budget coming up, so we suggest that the city support that request. And then secondly would be a request that the legislature identify $450 million for construction of those north end improvements. And we intentionally recommend that that be stated broadly, so that there is flexibility for the legislature to consider various options for how to fund those projects.
Yeah, and if I can just step in, to reinforce our recommendation of the broad language, depending on what happens with initiatives on the November ballot, the potential for a mini package, and how the conversation around tolling occurs within the legislature, there are many different ways that the legislature could satisfy the community's need to make this $450 million of investments. And we want to keep the door open to being able to push on any of those avenues that seems like we're most likely going to get across the finish line. So that's the reason to keep it broad.
For an operating budget request, the kind of the idea that's risen to the top is funding for the Canyon Park Master Plan. And really this project request is still being formulated, and we're working with city staff to figure out what the proper funding level would be. At this time, it sounds like there would be some type of city contribution as well, but that's still in the works. On the capital budget, there's a couple different options, and so we are exploring them and working with city staff to figure out which capital budget request places the city in the best position to be competitive amongst other capital funding requests. And so right now there's 2 different parks projects that are we would bundle together given their size. The first is funding to finalize the improvements at Lieutenant Madrazo Memorial Park, and then funding for a, I'm forgetting the word, what was it? An inclusive playground, that's the word. And specifics about that, I think are still in the works as well, but those 2 projects together would be one capital funding request. Another opportunity is regarding downtown site cleanup. It would be packaged as economic development project in Bothell's downtown. And then thirdly, as Tori mentioned earlier, a potential request regarding the DNR land. And we're still in the preliminary phases of trying to figure out what that would look like. It is a little bit more complex, not your traditional capital budget request because it does involve a state agency, but we are exploring opportunities for that project. And then the last 2 items are not direct funding requests, so they wouldn't be individual appropriations, but they are items that, as we've talked with you all and with staff, we've identified as important to the city. The first is for a WWRP grant program. Right now, the city is ranked very well on the grant program list, and the bridge at Bothell Landing, if that grant program receives the funding that they were requesting, the city would receive a little over $1 million for that bridge project. And then lastly, a statement about supporting requesting funding for Basic Law Enforcement Academy. Understand that that's an important issue to the city and has been directly impacting you all in ways that maybe that stand out to other jurisdictions, or more so than other jurisdictions. So those are the ideas that we're pursuing right now. As we mentioned, we're still working these through, trying to determine what makes the most sense politically, what has the best story, so that we can position you all in the best place to secure funding and get that return on investment. As we continue to have conversations, we'll be back before you on November 13th with draft documents for you to review and provide us feedback on. The goal is on December 4th, you all would be comfortable with the legislative agenda and policy manual and would adopt those final documents. And then on December 6th, we're scheduled to meet with the delegation and as a council and as a city, brief them on the city's priorities. 6th or the 10th? Oh, did I say 6th? I meant 10th.
I think the one thing that I'll say is and I'll just take us back to this slide around the funding requests is, I want to emphasize under capital that there's ors, not ands, in between the various projects that are listed there. We do need to select one. And just to reiterate some of the items that we mentioned when we were here last time in terms of what makes a viable project. It's, if you ask for funding and you don't receive the full amount, are you still able to deliver the project? Yes, should be the answer to that question. 2 would be making sure there's strong support for the project amongst the community as well as amongst you all as a council. And 3 really kind of boils down to the right story and the right dollar amount. So there are, if $5 million in funding is needed, that's probably too big of a bite to be a viable request to be successful. So then we would look at how do we make that a more more viable ask by phasing the project or looking at other ways of repackaging it. So that's the work we're doing right now on each of those three, is looking at those criteria that and how to identify which of those three would be most competitive.
I've got a ton of questions. Are you guys ready to ask questions? Are you guys done?
Yeah.
That's it? Okay, cool. Who wants to go first? Deputy Mayor? Yeah, I thought, wait, no. Somebody else want to go first? No? Councilmember McCullough, did you want to go first?
I can start.
There we go.
But Davina had her hand up, so I was going to let her go. I just need for you to expound a little bit more on economic development for downtown, so that you tell me a little bit more about what that means.
Yes, so the reason it's phrased that way is because really what it would be is funding request to assist with the site cleanups downtown. And we don't know specifically which site it would be, for how much, but as soon as we say site cleanups downtown, down in Olympia, they no longer think capital budget. So packaging it as an economic development request makes it more likely to be a capital budget project.
So that's one where you all refer to it as site cleanup. As we go to Olympia in securing funding for that project, we would give you talking points and prepare you to speak about it in a different way that we think would make it more competitive in the legislative environment.
And I guess my further question would be then, you said that we have to have the right funding amount. So we have to really determine, if we're talking about site cleanup, what's that funding amount, correct? That is reasonable.
Correct. So you would have to select which site, how much money, and that would have to make sense given the competitive environment.
Thank you, Brianna. It's been great working with you. We did some great things together, didn't we?
We did. We did. We can keep doing great things.
We will.
All right, I'll go next. So the Canyon Park Master Plan, you guys are aware of the $150,000 that went to Cascadia that's supposed to start the initiation of the project?
Yes,
Good.
yes.
Okay.
So my understanding, and this is based on a conversation that I had with Community Development Director, and so my understanding is there are 4 different phases to that project. The $150,000 is going towards phase 2 of the land use. We're still needing funding for phase 3 and 4, which would be the environmental review and the transportation analysis. So, I mean, I'll let staff speak to that because I'm sure they're much more knowledgeable on that project than I am. But yes, we are tracking that there has been some state funding already secured.
Yeah, because I got the comment, what did you do with that money? So just make sure
Yes.
that ping that in there.
That will be a question that we'll get. And I mean, we do think that we have a strong story to tell.
Good. So the DNR trust land, I don't know if we want to put a whole bunch of effort into this, but it has become apparent to us that they want market value. And I just have a philosophical issue with that, so I don't know if we want to spend our time lobbying down there about DNR land inside the urban growth boundary that's still forest, and then there's a city that's willing to take it on. That it seems a little crazy that it's public land that you're then asking a local government to give full market value for, to try to perpetuate as a forest in perpetuity. So I don't know if that's in the wheelhouse with the discussion over the DNR land, but that to me just doesn't seem right from how we run our state government.
And that is why we said that one has a lot of complexities that we're working our way through. So to advance that forward, it would not be a traditional capital funding request. And it also requires inner workings and either opposing a state agency or somehow getting them to be on the same page as us. And then there's a whole set of regulations that they're bound to associated with the trust that Shelley's done a lot of work diving into that we can certainly talk about. I'll just share, I mean, if it's important to the council, we will dedicate as much time and energy as necessary to find a way of identifying a path forward. That being said, of the other options you have, it is the most complex. And if you're looking at a competitive environment, probably wouldn't be at the top of our list of recommendations.
Yeah, I wasn't endorsing that one. So one other quick question. So the economic development downtown, how's the MACA fund looking this year? Because we we did have money from the state to clean it up, and then when we got into the negotiations of the actual contract, it went from 80% to 50%, something like that, that they would pay and we would pay.
Yeah, so again, this is one where staff may be able to speak a little bit more knowledgeably, but my understanding is that that city match percent is up to agency discretion, and it really is dependent on how much funding is available. I don't think that there's been any significant increase in MOTCA funding, though I know there is a push to have that funding increased, and with that funding increase, request that there be less burden on local jurisdictions to come up with that match. But I don't know that there's any guarantee that that will be the case.
Okay. So just out of those three, I would choose the downtown economic development and try to get those properties cleaned up, or have the state help us fund cleanup would be much appreciated. We've sunk, I don't know how many millions into that property, and it's still not clean. So the multiple properties, and they're still not clean. More than we thought we were going to spend, I believe. Is that right? Is that an accurate statement? Okay, good. Yep, that's all I had for you. All right, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
So thank you, Councilmember McAuliffe. That was my question as well, that one that you asked. Along with those three capital, I wanted to ask that the inclusion park doesn't sound, or playground doesn't sound familiar to me. Was that taken from the capital facilities plan?
It was not. We just discussed it during that meeting. We thought that there is a real need to have sort of a inclusive playground for kids with disabilities around the town. So we don't have a funding source for it. We didn't have a plan that was, that would address that, but it was just an idea that we threw out on the table, and that would be for like wheelchair access to some of the playgrounds. We simply don't have that.
So it'd be amending our current playgrounds?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I know that the capital facilities plan that was passed by the committee is probably not going to be the one that we see, given our budget concerns. And so I just wanted to kind of understand where that came from. I would also agree, probably if I had to vote, I would be more interested in the economic development monies. I also wanted to ask, so I had a phone call today from UW Bothell wanting to ask if we would support their legislative agenda, to which I said, well, is it going to harm our legislative agenda to put your legislative agenda on ours? So I wondered if you could speak to that. Of course, they said they wouldn't put ours on there, so I figured, well, that seems obvious then, but maybe you could speak to that, or if there are other ways that we could support them, whether it's writing a letter or whatever.
That's what your policy manual's for.
Okay.
Yeah, is we would take the items that are on their legislative agenda and incorporate the ones that you all would like to endorse and play a supportive role in the policy manual.
Okay, great. And then maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I wanted to ask, at some point, will you be making recommendations as far as whether or not we should continue to lobby during AWC days, or if we should make a concerted effort to go at a different time when we have a better chance of kind of standing out from the herd?
Yes, you make a really great point. Some of that is dependent on your availability and your schedules when you can come down to Olympia. We do recommend that you come down not during city action days, which to some council members doesn't sound intuitive, but as you got to the point, during those committee action days, you don't get as much time with your legislators and their attention is divided. So that's one of the reasons we want to make sure we do a pre-session meeting so that we have dedicated time to talk with the legislators, answer questions, and then again, follow up with them once they're down in Olympia with office visits.
And I'll just say, out of fairness to AWC, it's to come down in addition to City Action Days so that you're still participating in City Action Days.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
If I may, so we heard a couple of you speak to a preference on the capital funding request. If that's a strong preference amongst council between now and the next time before you, that's where we will focus our time, energy, and effort. And that would be helpful nodding of head direction to give us. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but it would be helpful in guiding.
Let's sound off. Heads nodding, something, anything? Councilmember Zorn?
If we were to prioritize, I think focusing in on ways to get some traction with cleaning up our soil is number one, and probably second, and they're all good, would be funding for Canyon Park Master Plan.
Okay. And it's one per budget, so you could do both those.
So yeah, the idea is that we only have one in the operating budget, and that is Canyon Park. And transportation is one, and then capital, there's three. We got to pick one of the three.
Okay, so that was what I was understanding, but as this conversation was going, it sounded like we were narrowing it down even more. So yeah, no,
Economic development downtown.
yes.
That's where you're at. Okay.
Economic development downtown.
Councilmember Olson.
Economic development downtown.
Okay. I don't know. I think that's probably more than four.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
I think that's all we have for you.
Okay. Yeah. Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you. So I had a question around the economic cleanup, the cleanup downtown. If we feel the funding is not going to be increased, it is something that we really want to get funding for. But if we feel it's not going to get increased and it's not going to have any value to us, do we really want to put that at a priority of our legislative priorities?
You want to explain the distinction?
Yeah, so what I was referring to earlier, the MATCA funding, that is dedicated funding that's set aside within the Department of Ecology budget to help jurisdictions with site cleanups. What we would be pursuing through the capital budget is a direct appropriation to the city of Bothell to help with site cleanup. So it's essentially drawing on two different funding resources. It's possible that the MATCA funds will not grow, but that does not preclude us from receiving funding from the capital budget.
And if we're
to
getting,
draw that distinction is why we would sort of repackage it and make it the emphasis on what it means for your downtown. And it's about part of revitalizing your downtown. It's part of developing and supporting economic development in your downtown. And as part of that, it includes site cleanup, but we would be messaging it a little different.
and so they wouldn't look at it differently because we're trying to get it from two pots of funding? We would be okay with that? Mm-hmm. Trying to get it from two? Okay. The inclusive playground that you brought up, is there, and this might be a question for the city, is there opportunities there for us to do that at Human Services? To fund some of that stuff? Or is that something we need to go to the state for?
We'd have to look. I believe your human services, the budget that you've put together for your human services is totally at your discretion. But I'd have to look to see if council passed a policy, if there was anything sort of guiding that. But we can find that out. We'll bring that back on the 9th or the 16th as part of the budget discussion, because those are discretionary monies, and they were going to be part of the discussion anyway.
Okay, great. And then the, sounds like the number one bullet here, transportation, that's pretty well set. We need to, that needs to be a top priority, right? There's nothing can go above that. We need to make that happen. We hear that regionally that we need to make that happen.
That's up to you all.
Okay. So I don't really want to dive into that one. I agree Canyon Park is critical. I mean, we're hearing 2050. We're hearing about the growth that's going to happen in the North End, and that's our regional growth center. So we really want to see about getting funding there. So I'm definitely in support of that. I'm supportive of the economic development cleanup downtown. I'm a little leery of that, depending on how they look at it for funding sources, whatever, if there's anything available to us. But I'm also a parks guy, so I'm also looking at that. The thing I would ask about DNR trust land, is there opportunities for transfer development rights on that land, or is there any other avenues for funding that may be available through other avenues, why we would just not put that on our priorities?
That's a good question. That's one of the things that we're exploring right now. What are the other opportunities? It's DNR trust land, and so the trust land, the way that it functions at the state level is the value of the timber on the trust land is then sold and put towards school construction. So the state has an obligation to sell that property at market value in addition to the cost that you would, or the value that would be generated from the timber. So I think the long and short to your answer to your question is yes, there are several ways to skin this cat. It's a matter of determining what is the most feasible and what that path forward could look like.
Okay. And then law enforcement, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so just as an example, I worked on a similar DNR trust land project over in the city of Pasco. That piece of property was very unique in that it was not timberland, it was agricultural land, but it fundamentally moved forward both with legislative direction and via a land swap. And it was pretty complex, and it took 3 legislative sessions. I think in terms, you had asked, why not have the DNR trust land on the legislative agenda? I think we need to spend quite a bit of time, and I'm not sure we'll be able to do it by the time we're before you next time, to identify what is the path forward. You can't just put it on the legislative agenda with no ask or path forward. That doesn't hold any value to really anyone. We can certainly try and identify what the path forward is. Once we've identified it, then present it to the legislature as here's an option on how we deal with this property. The other component is we really do recommend you stick to 1 request per budget. So to the extent that capital funding is a part of that very complex solution, then you would have to pick that as the project.
Okay. And then the academy funding, that's one that would just be on there. It's not affecting anything else. It's not a request. It's just we're supporting that.
It's essentially a statement of support, yes. And it would have the specifics of how the lack of funding has impacted Bothell directly so that your legislators know this is the impact to my constituents.
Okay. And then you mentioned AWC days. I've been down to almost everyone that being elected. I've been down there, and I will tell you that it is a rat race down there. However, it's not just your legislators that you're meeting. You're meeting a bunch of other legislators that can actually help you do things that you might not have thought you could do. So have you seen the AWC priorities this year? How do ours align with theirs?
The primary overlap is in the Basic Law Enforcement Academy funding. That is one of your priorities and one of their priorities. The other items on their list would be reflected in your policy manual. The reason we're not taking all of AWC's priorities and putting them on your list is because we really want to get your legislators focused on advocating for those, short list of items, and that for that short list of items to have a direct return on investment.
Okay. And I guess last is Brianna, right? I want to just tell you thank you because I was reminded that you had a very big part in making sure we got that $1 million fund for Wayne Golf Course. Yeah. So thank you.
Councilmember McCullough. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Okay, Councilmember McCullough, real quick. Go ahead.
My last one is that I didn't, the story behind Canyon Park Master Plan as a regional growth center, the story behind that is it's our economic engine. And so while I know it's a master plan, I think that we all have to recognize that's the story. That's our biggest economic engine for the city of Bothell.
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the reasons that we think it has such a strong story behind it, that in spite of the state already putting money towards the project, it still makes sense to keep this as a request.
Thank you.
City Manager, you had something to add?
I did. I just wanted to let the council know that Director Stroop and I met with the representative from DNR. The city does have a letter of interest, which is basically a first right of refusal on the DNR parcel that expires at the end of this year. In November, we'll be bringing an item before you to consider an extension, a 1-year extension to that first right of refusal or letter of interest letter. And as part of that, we can have a discussion about next steps and options and opportunities.
All right. Thank you. Anything on this side? We're good over here? Yep. Thanks for coming in, you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so City Attorney, how do we do two different things? And do we need to go to closed session and then come back and then go back into executive session, or we just do it all at one time?
We can do it all at one time.
Okay. So the council needs to go into closed session for labor negotiations pursuant to RCW 4230-144A. For how much time? Or we lump sum, I guess, for both of them?
2 hours.
And then we're also going to go into executive session for potential litigation pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1I, and we'll be in executive session for 2 hours, which puts us at, we'll take a break right now for 10 minutes, so let's make it 9:20. Are we going to come back? Nope, so we'll be adjourned after that.
Yep.